International relations is a major field within political science. It's so important that it sometimes has its own departments at university. I'm Professor Hellstrom. Welcome to a brief introduction to the field of international relations. This field, also known as IR for short, concerns itself with the relationships between sovereign governments across the world stage. We've thus moved away from fields that study a single government and those fields that try to understand how internal conditions compels this single government to act, to the level where external conditions compel sovereign governments to act in particular ways in relation to other sovereign governments. This video will give you a brief introduction to what this field studies. Now, before we examine this field in greater detail, we will first consider some basic concepts of the field. And one piece of major critique may be levied against the field of international relations from political scientists and others. Let's start with the critique. A weakness of IR, international relations, is that it regards each state as a homogeneous entity that reacts more or less rationally to pursue its own self-interest in relation to the other sovereign governments on the arena of foreign policy. In other words, it disregards most of the findings of other political scientists that other political scientists have made regarding the internal complexity of the sovereign government itself, such as all those domestic factors that push and pull governments in various ways, as well as interdepartmental competition. What basic concepts do this field use? For simplicity, we can divide them into diplomacy, factors in policymaking, and actors. Let's start with diplomacy. Diplomacy consists of international negotiation and discussions that take place on an official and sometimes even unofficial level between and among states. These activities can deter war, enable trade, and contribute to understanding between governments. Much of foreign policy decision-making is based on diplomacy. The public sees diplomatic activities when a government is communicating with an ambassador from another country, or when a government hosts a visit from a government official from another country, for example. What are some factors that play into foreign policy making then? Geography matters. The location of a country, their neighbors, natural resources. Is there sufficient natural resources to run an economy? Is there dependence on some particular natural resource that it needs to get from the outside? What about population? What is the population levels, education, density, population density, and so on? So geography and the factors involved with geography matters a lot. Technological development, research and development, of course, is going to have an impact on a country's diplomacy. A technologically advanced country can sell its advances to others and perhaps sometimes want to keep those new technologies hidden from the rest of the world. And certainly we see this most clearly in armed conflicts, where whoever has the most advanced technology for their weapon systems have an edge. But there's also internal political structures and processes and how politics works in that state, that government. The government remains, in this context, the most important actor in international relations. It operates in an environment of what we call structural anarchy. This is not the same as chaos, but rather the assumption that no higher authority exists above the sovereign state for international relations in general. In the 19th century, which this was very much the case, the only potent actors on the world stage at that time were the national governments, and certainly the national governments of world empires that were literally dividing up the world between them. And it was treaties between those world empires that dictated the power dynamics of the arena at the time. And smaller countries, smaller powers had to relate to those empires. However, while structural anarchy still exists in the 21st century, the stage of the intergovernment relations has also changed and evolved, now includes other important actors, some of which reduce the level of anarchy in the world. Some examples of such actors include bodies of international governance. So these institutions are arenas for multilateral government relationships, and arguably the type of actor that has had the most profound impact to limit the degree of anarchy in international relations by introducing the rules-based order of international law, which rose to prominence after 1945. Multilateralism here means that the governments of many countries have joined the body to pursue a common goal or several common goals, and at least officially accept the decisions made together in that body, even when it loses a vote. The degree to which sovereignty is ceded to such a body of governance in question varies between the bodies. In the European Union, for example, member states do cede some of their sovereignty to the EU level in exchange for a long range of strong benefits that come from being a member. In the United Nations, however, members do not cede any sovereignty at all. But that also means that the United Nations cannot force member states to enforce its resolutions. Other examples of international bodies of governance include NATO, the African Union, and ASEAN in Asia-Pacific area. Another category of actors consists of the international non-governmental organizations, or NGOs. These are non-profit organizations with an international reach. Examples include the International Red Cross, Amnesty International, and Greenpeace, for example. None of these organizations run countries, but they work to fulfill their missions regardless of national boundaries or borders, and are often strong enough to bring attention to global issues through their activism and advocacy, putting public pressure then on both national governments and international bodies of governance. And then there are the multinational corporations, or the MNCs. These are for-profit organizations large enough to operate across borders, sometimes in many countries. Examples include McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Enron, Apple, Facebook, and Nestle, for example. These companies can often wield power on the international stage by virtue of their investments and their large scale. They transfer large amounts of capital between countries, which can affect employment levels, wage levels, economic growth levels in the host country where they operate. Thus, under the influence of these non-state actors, the structural anarchy moved towards more and more structure as international governance leads to a more interconnected and interdependent world during the late 20th and early 21st centuries. It remains to be seen if that trend will continue given the shifts in global politics over the last decade. If you find this video useful, please take the time to press that subscribe and bell buttons so you can get notified when new content is published. You can also support the channel by joining the community or supporting me on Patreon or Ko-fi. Every little bit helps.